Thank you. Thank you very much. Good afternoon to all of you. The President ISL, Engineer Professor Manoj Paldevatta. In fact, he was my college mate and the batch mate. Now only I realize how old we are, because all of us are now more or less around the end of our professional career. President-elect and the chair of the techno2019 organizing committee, Engineer Professor Sarat Abekong, past presidents and members at the stage, members of the council, distinguished invitees, ladies and gentlemen. In fact, it is with great pleasure that I accepted this invitation when I was contacted by Engineer Dr. Chandana Gamage and Engineer Professor Sarat Abekong some time ago. But the original date I was not going to make it, and when I informed him, then he said, okay, we would have it on the 12th of July. So fortunately, I managed to find time in between my missions in the region. As you know, I am working for South Asia Energy Division, which means I tend to travel a lot in South Asia. So it's quite easy for me to make a detour and come to Colombo. In fact, I usually do that quite often. That particular week, when the original date was fixed, unfortunately, we had the biggest clean energy conference in Asia held in Manila. That's an annual event which Asian Development Bank organizes. So I couldn't be out of it being an energy director during that week. So it's a real pleasure to be here and at this premier National Engineering and Technology Exhibition organized by IESL. As I understand, it is for the 34th time, 34th successive year. That's the most important thing. And always, as I say, it's always great to be back in Colombo among the engineering fraternity. After some time, I used to be in these gatherings quite often when I was in Sri Lanka. In fact, when I was in the council many years ago. Now it's not that often. I have been, as you heard from my very kind introduction, which is quite lengthy in fact, I have been quite active mostly in the energy sector for all my professional life. Started way back in 1986 after my graduation. During these 30-odd years, as all of us know, the energy sector has transformed significantly all over the world, both in the developing countries as well as in the developed world. Considering this transformation in the energy sector goes well with the theme of this year's Techno 2019, which is Innovative Engineering Towards Sustainable Sri Lanka, I thought it would be a good idea to trace back these developments during the last 30 years since I came into the energy sector as a professional in the context of sustainable development. Of course, since my specialty is in energy, I have to talk about energy. What else can I talk? So, but it is quite connected to sustainable development and, of course, sustainable development in Sri Lanka in particular. I thought it's always good to look at the energy sector development in that context. There is always innovation in engineering associated with these developments, because obviously the energy sector development means if it is sustainable, you need to have innovation in it for sure. In the recent past, this transformation in the energy sector came mainly because of the increasing attention to mitigating climate change impacts and how to address associated issues. As all of us know, we talk about climate change and climate change mitigation, how much we should be responsible as a developing country as against the responsibility of the developed world. And that's a debate which is ongoing. As all of us know, energy sector emissions are a key factor in climate change mitigation efforts, because energy sector plays a huge role within climate change mitigation efforts. Therefore, energy sector plays an important role in the pledges various countries have made towards Paris Agreement, which is the landmark agreement in 2015 reached by almost all the countries in the world to mitigate climate change. And of course, some of the countries have withdrawn from Paris Agreement. As you know, one of them is United States. And apart from that, most of the other countries are still within that agreement. And there are pledges already given by these countries for whatever efforts associated with these climate mitigation efforts. And they are called nationally determined contributions. If you look at nationally determined contributions of most of these countries, of course all these countries, these pledges include things relating to clean energy development, which means renewable energy development and energy efficiency. And even well before Paris Agreement, most countries started accelerated clean energy development due to its national benefits. I don't have to give you national benefits associated with clean energy development, mostly avoidance of local pollution and improved energy security, even at local levels. In fact, this reminds me of a field visit which I undertook a long time ago when I was in Sri Lanka to evaluate one of the small village hydro schemes in Dharanegala, a remote corner of Dharanegala. I can still remember when I went there to look at the mini hydro, which had been already constructed and operated for some time. The national grid had already come. And so we thought, obviously, these guys would get rid of the micro hydro, because national grid is supposed to be more reliable, more effective when it comes to providing energy services to these small communities. But when I talked to them, they said, no, sir, we are not interested in getting rid of this micro hydro because we thought of shifting it somewhere else. They said, no, because we like to have the energy security. We like to have the quality of supply. And it's at that time, it is that small hydro which was giving the security of supply to this community and the quality of supply. Because at the end of the distribution line, it was low voltage, it was not really reliable in terms of providing electricity to these small. So this is exactly the kind of things what we expect from renewable energy development in a country at a larger scale. Today, clean energy development, which had been on the sidelines for a long time, except of course large hydros, as you know, in Sri Lanka we had the first large hydro commission in 1950, Lakshapana, and this had been there for a long time. But only now clean energy development or renewable energy has been mainstreamed in many countries around the world. This includes most of the developing countries in the Asia-Pacific region at all levels. We are talking about, if we are talking about low-income countries, lower middle-income countries, or upper middle-income countries, and of course high-income countries, all these countries have mainstream clean energy development or renewable energy in their energy systems. And the reasons are manifold. Continuously lowering cost of wind, solar, small hydro, and some of the other renewable energy systems. They are coming very close to conventional systems or even cheaper than conventional systems. And even energy storage and the local environmental benefits, local employment generation, empowerment of a larger section of the population due to distributed nature of clean energy. You may sometimes challenge me, but if you look at solar rooftops we are looking at now, and all these consumers are empowered now, they are producers. And that empowerment matters a lot when it comes to running an energy system. And now the power is more or less distributed, the power, the empowerment in the energy industry. And the opportunities for the consumer to become producers, and we call them prosumers. They become consumers at one point or producers at another point. And of course, globally, there is a big disadvantage, that is climate mitigation, among others. We have this happening in our own backyard, with India aiming at 175 gigawatts of renewable energy by 2022. In 3 years' time, they are expected to have 175 gigawatts of power capacity. In fact, at the moment, India has roughly about 250 gigawatts of installed capacity. And imagine almost 50% of the capacity or 40% of the capacity by 2022 will come from renewable energy sources. And that's something which they are really working towards. In fact, if you look at now, it's about 75 gigawatts already in place. However, there are many incentives. They have achieved only about 75 gigawatts, and we have only 3 years to go. And I'm sure with the current government's emphasis on renewable energy, they will definitely achieve this. Of course, along with it, there are so many other incentives currently in place to expedite this process to reach the targets, along with other important initiatives in the areas of energy efficiency, battery storage, electric vehicles, efficient solar-powered water pumping for agriculture, feeder separation to encourage efficient electricity use in agriculture, solarization or distribution feeders, etc. If you look at, I can go on, it's a long list of initiatives taken by the government of India to bring in renewable energy into the system, to improve energy efficiency, and to do whatever they can do to address climate mitigation issues. And similarly in Bangladesh, there is a strong drive to install grid-connected solar plants, including floating solar in some of their water bodies. In fact, they have some of the largest water bodies around, and they're trying to install floating solar in some of their water bodies. Nepal, with all the hydro resources, Nepal is full of hydro resources, as you all know, estimated roughly about 42,000 megawatts, developed only about 1,000 megawatts, by the way. But they are still trying to diversify their renewable energy mix into solar with grid-connected solar plants. And Maldives, if you look at, there are about over 1,000 islands in Maldives, out of which about 200 of them are inhabited islands. And there is a project which we fund where we are trying to bring in energy-efficient diesels with solar and storage hybrids. So Maldives is going ahead with such interventions. And of course with efficient controls to make sure that we can absorb those intermittent renewable energy sources. We are really happy that Sri Lanka started on these initiatives many years ago, perhaps even before all the others in the region, since late 1990s, as you all know, with initiatives in micro-hydro sector, and later expanding it to other areas such as wind and solar. And we were one of the first countries in the region to offer feed-in tariffs, standardized power purchase tariffs for small micro-hydros. Net metering and its derivatives, what we talk about now, all these different initiatives are on the papers for wrong reasons. Net metering plus, yeah, there's another one, I can't remember. The derivatives are net metering. In fact, Sri Lanka's solar home system program was the one replicated in Bangladesh later on. We had it first, and it was replicated in Bangladesh later on by the World Bank initiative. Now over 5 million solar home systems in Bangladesh. And of course 5 million in Bangladesh is not a lot, considering that they have 160 million people. But that was an initiative which was came into being as a replication of Sri Lanka program. And small hydro developers who came up as a result of the Sri Lankan policy initiatives in 1990s. You see them in Africa, you see them in Southeast Asia. Why? Because we basically got that industry from infancy to mature levels. And these investors went out to other countries. We really would like to see Sri Lanka to continue these great initiatives with a stronger and more progressive commitments, not to go back to 10, 15 years ago, but to move forward from what we have already achieved. One of the critical areas we need to address in renewable energy development is how to cope with this issue of intermittency. Everybody talk about solar come and go as the sun comes and goes, and or wind comes and goes, the wind power output changes. But in this age of ever advancing technologies, operational practices, and system controls largely assisted by increasing use of information communication technologies. We call them in our system now IoTs, or Internet of Things. And demand response is one of them. In fact, we can control the demand instead of trying to control the supply. And these are some of the initiatives, some of the actions we can take to control intermittency. And it's not an issue anymore. And intermittency is not something which we can now any longer hide behind as an excuse for not connecting more renewables to the grid or not optimizing the use of renewables. Those days that we can use that as an excuse is gone. We should not be doing it. In fact, I was listening to a very important, prominent character in renewable energy field 2 weeks ago, and his prediction is that almost all traditional power plants, coal, even for that matter gas power plants, which we are trying to put up, install. Of course, when you start now, it will be 5 years time by the time the plants come into being or commission. All of them within 10 to 15 years will be stranded assets, because if you have renewable energy, the renewable energy is developing so fast and connected to the systems that they will become stranded assets. So if you invest as a banker, when the Asian Development Bank invests in traditional power plants, now we have to think very carefully, because these are 20, 30 year lifetime power plants, and how long they can sustain financial returns. If they are going to be stranded assets, who is going to pay back all that money? So these are things what we have to very carefully now decide, because the advances in renewable energy is so fast. And again, if you look at smart metering with capability to have facilities such as demand control and real-time pricing is common in our backyard. If you look at India, it's installing millions of smart meters all over the place. Even in places like Meghalaya, Nagaland, Tripura, some of the backward states, you go there, they install only smart meters. The meters which has the facility, the capability to disconnect consumers, connect consumers, even to communicate real-time pricing if you really want to do so. So these are things which are happening in our backyard. We already use high temperature, low sag conductors in India. I don't know how many of you all have heard of it. These are actually important, very useful. This is a very useful technology where you can double the capacity of transmission with, which will save a lot of right-of-way, therefore resettlement issues, and lots of other things. Yeah, we use it in India, Bangladesh, and even in remote corners of Nepal, such as in Kaligandaki and Marshandi hydropower corridors to evacuate hydropower. Bangladesh is implementing one of the largest air-cooled combined cycle gas turbine plants in the region with a capacity of 800 megawatts. We just approved last year this particular loan to put up a power plant, and it's one of the largest air-cooled machines. It is also exploring the possibility of making power plant what we call zero liquid discharge, to make it basically very environmental friendly. And in Sri Lanka, most of you all from the CEB may know the wind power project. We are introducing radar-based bird movement detection system for turbine control to eliminate threats to mitigate bird movements in wind turbines. As you know, the wind power plant is actually sitting in the middle of a bird migratory area. And one of the major issues we had to face when we get this loan approved in the board is to address this migratory bird impact on the migratory birds. So one of the technologies which we brought in was basically this radar-based bird detecting control systems. Also, at the same time, we support regional power trade, expecting increased renewable energy use in the region. We supported 2 state-of-the-art high-voltage DC interconnections between Bangladesh and India, each with a capacity of 500 megawatts. Now we have altogether 1,000 megawatts. And in 2 months, we will be approving another loan for another 500 megawatt interconnection, again high-voltage DC on the eastern side of Bangladesh, totaling to 1,500 megawatts. We are in discussion with the government of Nepal for an interconnection with India for hydropower transfer. These are some of the technological interventions we support as part of ADB's emphasis on clean energy development and high-level technology adoption. All these initiatives finally converging to one target, one objective, that is reduce dependence on fossil fuels and increasing energy security. However, with all these advancements, with all these progress in the energy sector in various countries, we should keep in mind improved governance in the energy sector in all these countries have enormously helped conceptualizing and implementing these programs I mentioned. Energy sector governance is key, the most important thing behind all these initiatives. As you know, the supply industry gone through structural reforms and has been unbundled both vertically and horizontally in most of these countries, separating generation, transmission, distribution, and supply. Also, along with it, institutional reforms swept through separating policy making from utility business, and establishing independent regulation. It's a basic principle that you have to have these three separated. We should never try to put them together. By now, large majority of the countries, including many in the developing world around us, have fully unbundled energy supply industry with a reasonably independent regulatory environment. Also, increasing private sector participation could be seen in all the subsectors: generation, distribution, and even in transmission. If you go to India, you have transmission in the private sector. And in fact, Nepal is trying to bring in private sector into transmission, and Bangladesh too. If you look around, look at South Asia, India and Bangladesh have already significantly advanced and rapidly progressing in these areas, in the reforming the sector. Along with these reforms came the need to go through tariff reforms for cost recovery in the sector, in parallel with emphasis on increasing access to electricity. So we always think tariff reforms cannot be together with everything else, but they have to go in hand. In fact, India started reforms in 1995 and then went even further in reforms agenda through New Electricity Act in 2003. Today, in almost all the states in India, from large states like Uttar Pradesh with 220 million people and with a demand of 21,000 megawatts, to very small states like Meghalaya, where I am going actually after this event on Monday. I will be traveling to this state with only about 3.5 million people and a peak demand of only 400 megawatts. All these are unbundled. And if you look at economically advanced states like Maharashtra and economically backward states like Nagaland, all these states are these industries unbundled, and you have in all these states an independent regulator in place. This is seen everywhere in India. We have mostly unbundled power sector institution and independent regulation. As one can see, Sri Lanka still needs to go a long way in relation to sector governance compared to other countries in the region. In fact, we used to lead. Now in this particular area, we are really lagging behind. It is time that we look at this closely so that we do not lag behind. These reforms will undoubtedly help the energy sector and hence the country's economic development. Relating to these interventions, engineers who form the core of these sector institutions have an enormous responsibility to innovate and think of the longer term sustainability and take this progressive work forward. Ladies and gentlemen, with these few words, I wish techno2019 all the success. Thank you. Thank you very much.